All right. Hello, everyone. Well, welcome all my free-minded friends. JR Dukes at your service. Come on in and make yourself at home. We have a lot to get to today, a very busy news day, and I have several topics that I wish to discuss. So please come on in. I have already put in the chat down here that make yourself known, introduce yourself, let us know who you are and where you are from. It generally is interesting because we tend to have people from all over the world, which is one of the many blessings we all enjoy, especially with these type of YouTube forums. We are currently live right now. We're going to go ahead and check everything out. We are live on Facebook. It's looking good. Bear with me while I get this housekeeping stuff taken care of. Again, introduce yourself, say hello, let me know where you're from. Looks good on X. If you're having any trouble hearing me, please let me know in the comments so I can address it. Sometimes the StreamYard software does seem glitchy at times. In all fairness, I've been using it for a few months, but with these live streams, I'm still getting a little bit acquainted with it. I do like the software, but again, it does have some glitches at times, and hopefully we can work through them. Hello to everyone on X. Facebook is looking good. We already have a bunch from YouTube slowly pulling in here, and of course, my friends on Twitch. Welcome everyone. We will be streaming at times on the some of the other platforms that I'm on, like Rumble and one or two other ones. But generally speaking, them are the main four that I like to stream on, just for expediency reasons. All right, whistleblowers, SMR was from Moreno Valley, California. Hello and welcome, and of course, my friend Sapphire Ridge Acres, Montana, big sky country. I have been close to Montana, but I never had the pleasure of going there. I definitely have that on my to-do list. Seems like I'm stuck down here in Florida a lot, but it is what it is. So we're going to go ahead and get started with any further ado. At any time you have questions, please put them in the comments as I always remind everyone to do so. Also, my contact information is right here below. You'll also see my voice number right there. Don't hesitate to contact me. I have several folks that, well, frankly, keep in touch with me during the day. Let me know when something they think might be newsworthy that I might want to know about. And that's what I like. I like talking. I like chatting. I like to keep in touch with you, to be perfectly blunt and frank about it. So, finally getting used to this time frame change. I'm not sure how y'all are feeling, but it's feeling pretty good. I'm getting a little more used to it. To be honest with you, whenever it's light outside, I can pretty well get up as it is. So, folks, here we go. This has been a very busy day. I want to make one point too. Let me take a little quick sip. Sometimes talking can definitely make you dry out really quick. I had a few. I normally get very good comments from folks, and I appreciate that. Make no mistake about it. Your comments mean the world to me, and it ain't that I like pleasant comments for the sake of my ego or the sake of having pleasant comments. It does bring me joy, satisfaction that you benefit from what we're talking about. I did have one person mention on my title from yesterday. It said something to the effect of the judge or something with judgment pertaining to the judge. And they made the comment that the title did not reflect what I was talking about. And of course, I can't possibly put every single subject we're going to talk about on one tile. The individual went on to state that they didn't think I covered what was on the title. And of course, I just want to remind everyone that that's simply not the case. I do appreciate feedback, honest feedback, good, bad, indifferent, because I definitely want to hear what everyone thinks. Remember yesterday, though, we did talk extensively. We watched that Megan Kelly video with the individuals that she was also had on her channel commenting on this particular subject. And the judgment had all to do with Judge Scott McAfee of Fani Willis fame out of Fulton County, because the situation is that he now has a challenger that we will get to, a challenger challenging him in the upcoming election. And frankly speaking, there is a lot of concern as to whether or not that will affect his ultimate decision in the Fani Willis case. We want to say hello to Rosemary Fiera. She's always in the chat, and she's always got a heart right there. Very sweet. Always love to see you, Rosemary. Thank you. All right. So I just want to make the point that the label, the comment should match up. to what I tried to cover. Now, we have a lot of stuff to go over today, so we're going to dive right into it. So here we go. Let's take a quick peek at what I got on the agenda. First of all, great news for Donald Trump. If you love Donald Trump, as I love Donald Trump, you will rejoice in knowing, as the screen right here tells us, that yesterday he was able to clinch the 2024 Republican nomination for President of the United States. Yay! Lilo, thanks for checking in, my friend. The big ATL. Used to live up there myself, Lilo, out of Marietta. So I appreciate you joining us as always. So what do we got? We got Donald Trump closing the gap. And of course, President Joe Biden also locked up his nomination. He pretty well, as you know, ran unopposed. There was a certain segment of the population in a protest vote dealing with the Israel-Gaza situation, essentially voted for none of the above or uncommitted or whatever the exact label was. That's what that was all about. And I believe in America Samoa, there was actually one loss that he suffered, which happens from time to time in America Samoa. And if you don't know where America Samoa is, don't worry about it. All joking aside, I believe it's somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, kind of going towards Asia, but don't quote me on that. I haven't looked it up in a long time. So good job, President Trump. This is one more step in the right direction. I'm sure you agree. And we're going to talk about that briefly. And there's a story pertaining to that. Also, it's a little different for me to talk about. You know, I have a lot to say about the Fani Willis case. I am all over it like a wet blanket. I'm definitely going to be covering this situation from one end to the other. However, I would be remiss in not looking at the events of today. And one of the biggest stories of today is this TikTok situation. And I seriously have some things you need to know that you probably didn't know about this TikTok situation. Some very important things that you need to know when you're considering, should TikTok be banned in the United States or should it not be banned? Because I have some facts that once I tell you these facts, you're going to be going, ain't that something? Very interesting. And frankly, I do not hear anybody in the mainstream media talking about these particular facts, at least to the extent that I am going to be talking about these particular facts. And of course, they're making a big hoop-de-doo that President Donald Trump has apparently changed his position on the TikTok matter. They're saying that he had a change of heart after meeting with one of his mega donors. He was kind of patching it up with this mega donor, if you will. So we're going to talk about that. By the way, that guy, the mega donor that we're talking about, is a guy named Jeff Yass. So we'll see where that takes us. And then, like I said, I got some direct points. We're going to check on what X has to say about it. Some of the people on there have some interesting points. And in another fantastic development for former President Donald Trump and a few other co-defendants, 6 charges were dismissed today out of Fulton County, Georgia, in the bogus Fani Willis, DA Fani Willis of Fulton County fame, with her paramour, Nathan Wade, /lover, /co-conspirator, /partner in crime. The judge specifically took 3 charges off the table for Donald Trump. I actually have the document right here that I put on my computer. I found it, downloaded it. I don't know if we're going to have time to drill through that document in its entirety, but we're going to take a look at it. And if we don't get to it today, we will get to it in short order, because I think the document is worth the read. Generally, these pleadings, the way the judge thinks out his results, can give us a clue as to how the case may be going forward in the future. And of course, as I said earlier, we are waiting for the decision from Judge Scott McAfee pertaining to the recusal motion filed by attorney Ashley Merchant on behalf of her client, Michael Roman. The judge has a self-imposed deadline of 2 weeks, which basically means this Friday. And of course, tonight, as I'm speaking, it is Wednesday night. I anticipate having a decision on Friday, if not before. And like I said, we can kind of read the tea leaves. Everybody's kind of all over the map on this. I don't see how the judge does not take Fani Willis, Nathan Wade, and frankly, the entire DA's office off of this particular case. But we will see exactly how this goes. So we got those 6 charges. We got some insight into exactly what that means. And folks, a huge story that we have to talk about tonight is President Vladimir Putin of Russia. I'm sure you know who he is. He's the president, the leader of Russia. Russia is the largest country on earth, and they are a very powerful country because they have nuclear weapons. And he continuously is threatening to use these nuclear weapons. And I think somehow we're kind of sleepwalking our way into a problem. You have heard President Donald Trump make that comment, but I have something I want to tell you about this situation with President Putin and the Ukraine situation. I have an example, an illustration that I think will shed light on this in a way that you have not heard before. I can almost guarantee you have not heard this before. And I firmly believe it's going to give everybody a different take on what's going on. And at least you'll have a better understanding of it as far as I'm concerned. At any rate, more stories pertaining to Putin, and we'll just see how far along we get on this. And I even have an interesting comment by former President Donald Trump. So we're going to kind of see how this all pans out. So let's get started right away. Gloria, I appreciate you joining us tonight, all the way from California. And yes, Marietta, Georgia. Oh, Kennesaw Hospital. I had 3 of my children were born at Kennesaw Hospital, right there in Marietta. It is, in the hospital definitely still exists. It's a small world, isn't it, folks? Not only does the hospital still exist, but it had a huge makeover. It is an enormous facility, and I believe it is now a Trauma 1 hospital, which means they have life flight type flights into there. So it's really a monstrosity, if you will. But yes, all my kids, matter of fact, my youngest just turned 25 today. So kind of makes me feel old. It's funny how time slips away. We're all aware of that. All right. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about this first subject, the TikTok situation. You may or may not be aware that TikTok is owned and operated effectively by the Chinese Communist Party. They own the TikTok via another entity that is wholly owned by the Chinese government. The name of it is in the story right here. It's just got some simple American type name, but this is the operating company, if you will, that they operate TikTok from. Now, the problem with TikTok is real simple. Being owned by the Chinese government has the ability to influence all of us, to have our information, to know what's going on in each and every one of our lives. That bothers me. The Chinese government themselves have laws, have rules where every company that is a Chinese company must submit to the will of the Chinese government. And what that means is they have to turn over any and all information that the government wishes to have. There's also speculation that the Chinese government could hide basically worms or viruses or some kind of Trojan horse inside of these apps, such as TikTok. And in the event of war or some other kind of problem with China, they could simply activate these Trojan horses, if you will, to do whatever the communist Chinese government wants. There has already been several stories of this nature that's been circulated around. They have found malware, is probably the technical term for it, in the water supply pertaining to the United States, another type of infrastructure facilities. And you're probably aware of something called Taiwan. When you cut through all the smoke, the situation in Taiwan is really simple. It's a civil war that never was quite resolved. You had 2 different parties, just like in the American Civil War. You had the North and the South. To carry the illustration further, imagine that the North stayed on the mainland and the Southern rebels, they made it over to Taiwan. It's not an exact illustration, but it serves the point I'm trying to drive. So this is all the way back from like the 1940s. It was just simply never resolved. There's always been a policy that the United States has had, and that is one China, basically 2 different systems. And that has been the status quo for a long time. The problem now is that the president of China, what's his name, Xi, he has made it known very clearly that his number 1 priority is to address this situation and reunite Taiwan with Mother China by force if necessary. Just look at what he did to Hong Kong when the lease ran up for Britain at that time. Very serious stuff, very dangerous stuff, stuff that we all need to keep an eye on. So, all right, without further ado, let's go ahead and let's listen to this video, and we're going to talk about it. So here we go. All right, hang on one second here. I'm checking my lead. Give me a second. Let me figure out why this is not coming on. I want to make sure everybody can hear this. We're working on it to repair this. They are terrible. I told you they've been having a little bit of trouble at my friends over at StreamYard. I do not know why they're having trouble, but I think I know how to fix it. Give me 1 second here. I just have to reconnect this. Sorry for this slight delay. Sometimes I get so excited about these stories. Stop sharing. There we go. I get so excited chatting, I don't connect things the way they should be connected, but I'm going to fix it right now. Share screen, and boom. Okay, this is going to work. I apologize about that, folks. Do not worry.
On a bill that would force TikTok
should be right here.
to divest itself
boom.
of its Chinese ownership or be banned in the United States. Now, the legislation comes amid deep concerns about China's ability to access TikTok users' personal data and possibly use that to influence, for example, the November elections. Well, TikTok pushing back with a message encouraging users to contact their representatives and urge them to oppose this bill. Well, we are covering every angle of this story with Lauren Fox, who is on Capitol Hill. Mark Stewart is in Beijing, and Claire Duffy is in New York for us. Lauren, let's start with you. Why are so many lawmakers so exercised about this, so worried about TikTok?
Yeah, this has been building for a long time on the Hill, and their key concern is the national security implications of teenagers and Americans at large using this app. Many lawmakers don't use it themselves because of concerns about their data being shared with the Chinese government. The other concern that exists here is one of which some members who are voting against this bill say that they do not want to take away the freedom of users to operate this app. Now, I think that those two things exist in some ways, not in a vacuum, but lawmakers are going to be having this vote today on the House floor. It's going to require a 2/3 majority. They're bringing it under.
And of course, as a side note, y'all already know that indeed the House of Representatives did pass this particular bill. So they have voted overwhelmingly to ban TikTok. Now it goes to the Senate, and the future of it there is a little unclear, but we'll see how it goes.
A suspension of the rules, which means it would have to get a huge number of bipartisan members, Republicans and Democrats, to back it. And leaders are very confident that they are going to be able to get there, despite the fact that there are some Democrats who are warning that this could have political implications for President Joe Biden when he tries to rally the youth vote to the polls. Here's what they said.
I even started to notice some of the hair growing back at the end of the first bottle.
This has literally
hang on a second, folks.
It
My bad.
comes in a little dropper. You just.
My apologies. I'm going to fix this right now.
I don't think it'll be helpful.
I have an account set up that specifically is set up so that I don't have to pay for the commercials. So if y'all just give me 1 second, I'm going to switch right over. And
well,
here
teenagers don't often pay close attention
right back
to
on it.
U.S.
We're going to go right back
congressional
where we
votes,
were.
but
Here
they
we go.
oppose this bill. Well, we are covering every angle of this story with Lauren Fox, who is on Capitol Hill. Mark Stewart is in Beijing, and Claire Duffy is in New York for us. Lauren, let's start with you. Why are so many lawmakers so exercised about this, so worried about TikTok?
Yeah, this has been building for a long time on the Hill, and their key concern is the national security implications of teenagers and Americans at large using this app. Many lawmakers don't use it themselves because of concerns about their data being shared with the Chinese government. The other concern that exists here is one of which some members who are voting against this bill say that they do not want to take away the.
Yeah, just to remember, it is banned by many state governments, and I think the feds have banned it on all the devices. If you know something I don't know, you can go ahead and put that in the comments below, but I do believe it is banned currently on all of the federal devices, and a lot of states like here in Florida, they have instructed their employees not to put TikTok on their phones or devices.
Freedom of users to operate this app. Now, I think that those two things exist in some ways, not in a vacuum, but lawmakers are going to be having this vote today on the House floor. It's going to require a 2/3 majority. They're bringing it under a suspension of the rules, which means it would have to get a huge number of bipartisan members, Republicans and Democrats, to back it. And leaders are very confident that they are going to be able to get there, despite the fact that there are some Democrats who are warning that this could have political implications for President Joe Biden when he tries to rally the youth vote to the polls. Here's what they said.
I don't think it'll be helpful with young voters. But, you know, my argument here, yes, it has to do with young people, but taking a step back, I just think it's bad policy.
Successful politics is addition and multiplication. And cutting out a large group of young voters is not the best known strategy for re-election.
Now, President Joe Biden has said that he plans to sign this bill if it gets to his desk. But if the House can get it out of their chamber today, it then goes to the United States Senate. And the future is a little less certain over there. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said yesterday at a press conference he was still looking at the bill, still thinking about the path forward. So a lot of questions on whether or not this is going to have a chance on the floor.
Okay, so that's pretty well what I wanted to go over as far as TikTok is concerned. Now, I want to tell you what you need to know and what you need to be aware of when your friends are asking you questions or you're trying to simply just make up your own mind on TikTok one way or the other. Well, here's what you need to know. First of all, TikTok is on the news today. This is so outrageous what the United States is doing. It's so unfair what they're doing. It violates free speech. It violates our rights as a company. I mean, they're just going on and on about it. But the interesting thing is this, according to the internet, Facebook is banned in China. It's not allowed to operate there because they cannot comply with the communist government rules pertaining to basically censorship and giving information to the government that I just mentioned to you. Pinterest is banned. Any of these social media applications are outright banned in China. No American company, such as a media company, is allowed to operate in China. Just that simple. They're not allowed to operate in China, yet they're allowed to operate here. Here is a kicker. This is really a kick in the, you know what, their children. Well, first of all, TikTok itself is not allowed to operate in China. However, China does have a special app that they allow their children to use for a very limited amount of time per day, like 15 minutes a day. And that's it. Obviously, China is, in their mind, selling poison, if you will, to our children, to our youth. They're causing all the social ills associated with social media. And listen, I think some of that is overplayed as far as the problems with social media. That's where parents come in. Parents, you need to be monitoring your own children. I think that when you limit, or I should say, don't allow your children to be exposed to social media and computers, you're doing them a disservice, because what do you think is going to happen in the future? Do you think computers are going to go down? Do you think there's just going to be less people online? Of course not. The future is AI. The future is computers and our phones and interacting with these apps. It's just the way it's going to be. And to not allow your children to grow up with computers in this way is just not a good choice in my estimation. Obviously, as a parent, you got to make those decisions yourself. I would never second guess a parent. I can just tell you what my opinion of the situation is. However, you do need to use reasonable judgment. You need to use good common sense that God gave us all, and basically balance. That's one of my favorite words in life, is balance. You know what I mean? You gotta have balance in your life. You don't really want too much of anything, and you don't want that for your children either. But it's interesting how they allow essentially unfiltered whatever going to our children, yet their own children are limited for their own good. And it's a special app that is closely monitored by the authorities, and specifically the Communist Chinese Party. Does that not strike you as odd? It's just like a wow moment to me. they will not allow our companies to operate there. They won't even allow the apps to be there, even if the company is not there. It's strictly forbidden. It's something criminal. If you're Chinese, you live in China, and you're caught with these apps on your phone, you're in serious trouble with the authorities. You have a serious problem. Yet they are on TV all day long today talking about how terrible America is and how terrible the federal government is and how this is an overreach and how it's a violation of their rights when we don't enjoy the same rights going on in China. Kind of makes you think, don't it? It's kind of makes me think just absolutely how ridiculous the whole thing is. And some of the comments on social media are rather interesting too, and I'll show you some of them in a minute. But I did want to explain one other thing too. I've had individuals text me, and I had 1 or 2 emails, and they're basically asking about TikTok. And I would say the most common question has to do, how can the government ban a company like that? I mean, how can they just say you have to go out of business? And what about free speech? Well, I want you to remember this. We've talked about this before. A lot of times in the law, oftentimes in the law, it's not black and white. It's not always this or always that. It's a balancing act, and that's what the courts do. That's the ultimate job by the time you get to the Supreme Court. And what do I mean by a balancing act? Well, it's just that. And before, you may recall, I've used the example of literally where the rubber meets the road, a tire driving across pavement. That's kind of how the law works. Let's just say in this particular case, the tire is free speech rights that a company or an individual may have. And then the road, we'll just say that is the interest of the federal government to protect our country, period. We'll just call it that without getting too deep into the weeds. So where the rubber meets the road is the problem. And that's what the law is trying to figure out. And that's what they'll try to figure out if this bill actually becomes law. And one of the things that would bode well for the bill, if it becomes law, is it's not really an outright ban that you shall not exist, you shall die right now, where the government is basically taking someone's property without compensation. That's not exactly what's going on. The bill allows for this particular, for TikTok, the Chinese mother company, if they're allowed to sell it off to some other entity, some other person. And there are plenty of Americans who have stepped forward, or American companies have stepped forward and said, we are very willing to negotiate and talk about purchasing TikTok. So that's a little bit different than what we think of with an outright ban. And I think that would look favorable in the courts, because I can assure you TikTok will go to court to see if they could stop this on constitutional grounds. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why they're still in existence today, because recall, former President Donald Trump did ban TikTok by executive order. However, it was brought before a judge in court, and the judge put a freeze on the Donald Trump's executive order to essentially dissolve the company. And because he left office, the case was moot at that point, and so TikTok lived on. In this particular case, they simply are going to tell the court, listen, that the government has a extremely compelling interest, Judge, that we have to protect our national security. And in this case, in this particular example, when it comes to a hostile government, a communist government like they have in China, that is required, that the companies are required to give all the information to the government about our citizens, and there's the potential for malware and all this other stuff we've been talking about. I honestly think, especially with a heavy Supreme Court, I should say a Supreme Court that is heavily conservative, I think it would be a winning and compelling argument. I think we're going to find out, but I do think ultimately the conservative majority would rule in favor of the Biden administration, as they should in this particular case. And the way, one final comment on this, even free speech itself, we think as Americans, well, we can just say whatever we want, whenever we want. And don't get me wrong, freedom of speech is one of our most sacred rights, right up there with freedom of religion, these type of rights. However, The Supreme Court even limited free speech. For example, you cannot go into a crowded movie theater and scream the word fire and cause a stampede that ends up killing people. Now, the Supreme Court basically had a stroke, if you will, when they actually heard the particular case that I'm describing right now. They just were at extreme pain. They were in extreme pain. I mean, I can just imagine them wrestling with this on their mind. Man, we hate to limit free speech. We just hate to do it. And they were just really trying to find a way to work around this. Ultimately, they had to go ahead and say, in that particular situation, free speech even has limits. So I just leave that as an example for your consideration. And of course, right now it's extremely political because everybody's blaming everybody for what's going on. Frankly, I wish that President Donald Trump, let me go ahead and load this screen because I do want you to see just a few comments that's here on Twitter. I think I can just pull the tab up. Yeah, that should work. Okay, so I wish he would stay consistent with his position before that TikTok should be banned. I don't think he's on the winning side of the argument, and it looks bad because he just met with a huge campaign donor. This guy's like a multi-billionaire. We'll take a peek at that in 1 second. But you have Robert Reich, I think is how you say his last name. He's like, why did Trump flip-flop on TikTok? He wanted to be the one who banned it. After a meeting with a billionaire investor in the company, Trump's suddenly pro TikTok. Whatever you think of TikTok, this is why we need to know where Trump's getting the money to pay for it. Of course, it goes right back into the current politics of the time. So get used to it, folks. That's just the way it's going to be. You have the ACLU, of course. They're coming out, and this made me think of that illustration I just went through. Breaking: the House of Representatives just passed a bill that would effectively ban TikTok in the United States, violating the free speech rights of millions of Americans who use the platform daily to communicate and stay informed. It's another one of those tearjerker type comments. Oh man, that's just terrible. ACLU knows what I just told you, that it's a balancing act. And in this particular case, national security has to take a front seat to allowing the communist government in China to do what we've been talking about. It's really just that simple. So, all right, I think you get the idea. Everybody's going to be all over the map. But remember this, it passed today with a very, very heavy majority. Charles, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate having you in the comment. See, I read, Sapphire, I read an article yesterday that Rumble is in talks to buy. Yeah, Facebook is in talks, or at least has said publicly that they're interested. That guy that calls himself Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank, he was on Fox News and a few other channels talking about the fact he, along with a group of investors, would gladly buy TikTok, and they were definitely interested. So I don't think they'll have any trouble getting their money out of the company. It is definitely worth a ton of money. Absolutely. Zach, thanks for joining us. And yes, there are, let's see, I'm not an expert on how many hospitals are around there, but there are many hospitals. I know right there downtown Marietta is Kennestone, as we said. So, all right, let's move on to the next thing. I just want to show you briefly this guy that is this Jeff Yass that's been, I don't really see the press talking about him specifically. They just say some mystery billionaire. Don't get me wrong, this guy's worth a lot of money. We're going to take a quick peek at this. All right, here we go. And boom. All right, here we go. Jeff Yass. Of course, I'm referencing Wikipedia. All right, Jeffrey S. Yass, born 1956, is an American billionaire businessman. According to Forbes, Yass has a net worth of a mere $28.5 billion in 2023. Boy, that's a lot of money, isn't it? Wow. He is the co-founder and managing director of the Philadelphia-based SIG and an early investor in TikTok. In 2001, he joined the Executive Advisory Council of the Cato Institute. I'm sure y'all have heard of the Cato Institute. And Yass is the richest man in Pennsylvania. That's a great title. I'm the richest man in Pennsylvania. As of February, he is the largest donor in the 2024 U.S. election cycle, having donated $34 million to Republican groups and campaigns, according to an Israeli newspaper, he is a major supporter of Israeli right. I'm getting tongue twisted today. Right wing think tanks. You know what a think tank is? It's what you basically have just a bunch of people getting together and they're coming up with solutions, or they're just thinking through whatever. So that's who he is, in case you are wondering. There was let me see if which one it has it on there. There is a picture of him, because the short version is this. He met with Donald Trump. They had like a private get together at one of these high-end meetings, because this guy, when he makes a donation, it's not $150 like you have in the Fani Willis affair. This guy is donating tens of millions of dollars at a time. This is the kind of guy that someone like Donald Trump would definitely want on his side. There was a little tension between Donald Trump and this Yass guy originally, because Yass originally supported Vivek Ramaswamy when he was running to begin with. I think at this point, he's definitely trying to repair the fence, if you will, with Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump is, of course, trying to reciprocate as much. So anyway, enough on him and who he is. I did want to drill down on that and just kind of touch base on it, because I think it's important. Now, we are going to talk heavily about the Fani Willis matter, because as I said, there is a huge decision today where Donald Trump alone, 3 of the 6 charges were charges against him. So it really doesn't get any better than that. But before we drill down there, because it's going to take a little while to work through that, I have to talk to you about this situation with President Putin of Russia. I think it's a story that does not get enough attention, and it may not be the most exciting story to talk about, but it's necessary. And I want to watch this one little video. Most importantly, I want to explain it to you in a way that I'm quite certain you've never had it explained to you before, because we all need to understand it, so that we understand what is and frankly is not going through President Putin's mind, and why Donald Trump does what he does in relation to dealing with Vladimir Putin. So here we go on this.
Now let's talk about Vladimir Putin. He seems to be in a bad mood. He's saber-rattling again, threatening a nuclear war. Listen to this.
How can you be?
One quick note: this sable rattling and people saying that he's just talking. This is pay attention how many times you hear that, because we're gonna dissect this.
Ready for it? Are we really ready for nuclear war?
From the technical point of view, of course, we are ready.
We are technically ready. Now, Putin may be phrasing it differently, but there's no doubt as to what he's talking about. He's talking about nuclear weapons, and the threat is aimed at his adversaries, the West, led by the United States. And he said all of this in an interview. The Russian president laid out some ground rules for his American counterpart, Joe Biden.
The United States announced not sending troops to Ukraine. They are interventionists. That is how we will treat it, even if they appear on Ukrainian territory. They understand that. I told you that Biden is a representative of the traditional school of politics. That shows.
Now, that's a message for the US president. Putin is basically saying Ukraine is Russian territory. If American troops enter Ukraine, Moscow will have reason to escalate the fight. And that could mean deploying nuclear weapons, if that's what it comes down to. And here's something else that we must point out. Putin has done this before. He has issued nuclear threats in the past too, especially after his forces invaded Ukraine. But in this instance, his tone was more firm.
Why do we need to use weapons of mass destruction? There has never been such a need.
So this thought never occurred to you?
No, what for? Well, weapons exist to be used.
Weapons exist to be used. That's what Putin said about.
Folks, as you're listening to this, I want you to understand this is extremely, extremely troubling. I don't really think there's another way to say it. What bothers me is, unlike some of our presidents, such as Joe Biden, when Putin says something, he generally does it. Yet our leaders always say something to the effect of saber rattling. He is just talking. He's posturing. He's just in a bad place, so he wants to get everybody scared. The problem is Putin does what he says he's going to do, and he doesn't make a big, protracted whatever about it. We did not believe he was going to go into Ukraine. Everybody said, oh, he's not going to go. He's just trying to essentially cause fear and make people worry. It'd be silly for him to do that. It'd be silly for him to attack his own people effectively in Ukraine. Everybody was like, oh, it's just not going to happen, or he doesn't mean business. And he said, I'm going to go in if I don't get assurances that Ukraine is not going to join NATO. And what did the West, including the United States, do? We just said, no, it's not going to happen. These people are free people. These people are their own people, talking about the Ukrainians. And boom, he went in there. Now, obviously, their military did not perform the way it should perform, but Russia has to be taken very, very seriously because they are a nuclear power. Technically, they have more nuclear weapons than the United States. That might be a surprise, but it's true. Roughly speaking, Russia has 7,000, 7,500 nuclear weapons. The United States has about 6,000, 6,500. The advantage that Russia does have over the United States is Russia has what they call tactical nuclear weapons, which is essentially smaller weapons that can be deployed in the battlefield in a smaller way. It's kind of hard to get your mind around a small nuclear weapon, but that is the reality. They could essentially use these weapons on the battlefield, where the weapons the United States has mostly are the kind of weapons you would drop to literally level cities, complete cities with one bomb. I mean, you're talking monster nuclear bombs. So this is serious. It's a concern. And folks, notice that every time Donald Trump wants to talk to Putin, or that he wants to try to find a way to work out a situation or de-escalate something, he is attacked on all ends always. The irony here is that Trump is always right when it comes to Putin and it comes to these other world leaders. Look at this nonsense with him telling NATO, you guys need to pay up. He was criticized during the State of the Union address heavily, and they continue to hammer him. And I don't see the Republicans stepping up the way they should step up, so I'm going to step up. And here's the deal. He did say that if you don't pay, then I'm going to tell Putin you can do whatever the hell you want to do, or words to that effect. That is very effective, because the next day the news was how all these countries all of a sudden were going to write a check. See, everybody pays into NATO based on their gross domestic product. And I believe it's 2% is what you're supposed to pay in. When Trump was first president, majority of the members were behind on their dues. And that's putting it nicely. They just were not paying into NATO what they should pay into NATO. So Trump just told them straight up, I won't protect you. I'll cancel this. We're not going to play like this. Either pay up or you take your chances. It's just that simple. And guess what? He got a lot of complaints. He had a lot of people upset, but they paid. They paid like they never paid before. And even today, Biden needs to drop this, because he's on the wrong side of this equation. Trump said, I'll let Russia do whatever they want to. I don't care. Guess what? They are paying, and they continue to pay. I'll see between now and maybe tomorrow if I can find the news stories. I know I have them. If not, I'll look them back up. I can't remember the exact country, but I do know that Germany, a lot of these other countries, all of a sudden found the money, found the cash, and they have decided to pay up. Finland joined NATO recently. They have been on the border for quite some time. No pun intended, by the way. They're on the border. They do share a very long border with Russia, like 800 and some miles of border, which that alone shows that Putin made a grave mistake going into Ukraine, because now he's effectively doubled the border that he has to protect between Finland and Russia. And I believe in the last week or two that, Sweden just joined NATO, and there was a lot of opposition, but they got that handled. And as I just said, Finland did not want to join NATO only because they were concerned of essentially triggering or pushing Putin, and they did not want to do that, understandably. So here's what I want to tell you about this newscast we're watching. This is I think they call it Vintage, or Vantage, VANTAG. It is a new station out of India. If you've never heard of them, I encourage you to go over and check it out. Subscribe to them. This lady right here, I definitely don't always agree with her. She definitely has some liberal views, is probably the best way to say it. But at times they do a good job covering the news. And what I like about listening to the news there, it's a different perspective than you might hear in the States. So I would say listening to a whole collection of viewpoints is the best. And she does a great job putting all that together. This NATO expansion has been a problem since the 80s at a minimum. And it has been a thorn in the side of Putin. And we're going to watch this video for a little while, and I'm going to explain to you what Putin thinks. And what you're going to find is he's not as crazy as everybody else wants you to believe. This is what Donald Trump is effectively trying to say that, frankly, he has not even said, but I'm going to tell you, and I assure you, it's worth listening to what I got to say. You may be thinking, what is that bald-headed guy saying? You're going to find out here in just 1 second. Let's continue.
About his nuclear arsenal. And with this statement, he's shifting the onus on the West to de-escalate and to pull both parties away from the brink of a nuclear conflict. He also said that he's ready for a serious dialogue on Ukraine, but he has two preconditions. One, Russia will hold on to its territorial gains, and two, the West should give security.
Yvonne, appreciate you being here, young lady. And yes, the subscribers are definitely going up. Don't worry about that. I'm going to be hammering a bunch of shorts very soon, and that always seems to attract a bunch of subscribers. But our view counts and the growth of the channel is doing really good. Remember, on YouTube, it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 or 1 million subscribers. Technically, they treat you the same. What counts is our view counts. And even our video yesterday, I believe we're at 13,000 already on that. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying I'm very happy, and I'm blessed and fortunate, and I appreciate each one of you taking time. If you don't mind, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button. It helps out the channel, helps out the algorithm, and we can spread whatever it is I got to say around. And I have some regular videos that I'm going to start generating and posting on a more regular basis. So let's get back to listening to what Putin has to say. Pay attention to what he's saying, because it's going to fit in with what I'm about to tell you.
Guarantees. What does that mean? What are security guarantees? Putin did not spell it out, but most likely he's asking for a ban on Western deployments in Ukraine and a curb on NATO's activities in the region. Now, where does the West stand on these demands? For Joe Biden, they're a non-starter. In his State of the Union address, Biden declared that he won't bend before Russia.
Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable.
Biden is seeking a re-election this year. Any concessions to Russia would be political suicide. He won't do it. The only option is to keep backing Ukraine, and Joe Biden is going to extreme lengths to do it. He wanted to give an aid package to Ukraine, a package worth $60 billion, but it remains stuck in the US Congress. So Biden is looking for alternatives. Yesterday, he announced a new weapons package for Ukraine. This one is worth $300 million. This is what Washington will give Kiev, weapons worth $300 million, and it will leave America vulnerable. The US will be left with no money to replenish its own stocks, its own weapon stock. And this will put America's war readiness at risk. But President Biden remains firm. He's giving more weapons to Ukraine because he wants to be seen as doing something. He wants to be seen as still helping in the fight against Russia. And $300 million is a good amount. Ukraine could use every penny of it. But it won't be enough to turn the tide in their favor, or for that matter, to reassure American allies. Take Poland, for example. Their president is visiting the US, and this is what he said.
Believe in America. We believe that Poland and Europe need more America, militarily, politically, and economically. More American spirit in thinking and acting.
President Duda is not the only one asking America to do more. European allies are jittery. In Slovakia, there are protests. Thousands of people took to the streets to show their support for Ukraine and to criticize their own prime minister. His name is Robert Fico. He's seen as anti-Ukraine. He opposes military aid to Kiev. He says Ukraine should give up the land in Russian control and end the war. So basically, the Western camp is divided, and Putin is turning on the heat with threats of a nuclear war.
All right, there you go. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So let's take a peek at this, and let me explain to you in a way that maybe you have not heard this before. So we have to ask ourselves, we know that there's something going on here. Otherwise, I mean, people generally do things that are in their self-interest, or there's a reason, I should say, that they are doing what they're doing. And Putin is no different. There is a reason he's doing what he's doing. We just have to figure out what is that reason. Excuse me. It's one of those times of year where the sinuses are always causing issues. Y'all know how that is. All right. So we have to figure out what is going through Putin's mind. Why is he doing what he's doing? Okay. The reason is something called NATO. It is a association, a group of countries that are part of what's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, I'm not a NATO expert. I'm not a individual that claims any particular expertise. I'm just telling you what my opinion is, what I have observed, and exactly what I think needs to be done to fix the problem here, okay? So take a look with me. I'm going to minimize myself so you can see this right here. We're going to pull over to this map. There we go. All right. If you're not familiar with Ukraine, I'm going to show you Ukraine. Here's Ukraine. Now, give me 1 second, folks. I have to have something to drink. Bear with me one quick second here. Okay. So, Ukraine is in Europe. Now, take a look at this here. In the middle, I'm colorblind, among other issues. You see Ukraine. I don't know if that's blue or what the shading is, but you see it shaded right there. To the north of Ukraine, you see the UK, which, of course, is Britain. What is this about? How to think about Ukraine maps and charts? Yeah, I guess this map will do. I don't like this map. Let me, because that's not right. This is right. Let's go with this here. All right. I don't know what that was we were looking at, but anyway, this is Ukraine. This is even better. It's more pleasing to the eye. You see, Russia shares a border with Ukraine. You have to understand that Ukraine has been part of Russia for a very long time. As a matter of fact, you remember Mikhail Gorbachev, the famous leader with the dill on his forehead, that spot, that patch, whatever it was. Oh, it was a birthmark. That's what it was. Now, he was president when I was a kid, and of course, he's famous, among other things, but for meeting with former President Ronald Reagan. And of course, because of Ronald Reagan, you had the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Mikhail Gorbachev had a lot to do with that because he was seeking and ended up basically achieving peace, if you will, with the West, and brought about the end of the Cold War. And it had a lot of changes in Russia, and that upset Putin at the time, who was a young army officer that was serving in, I believe it was in Berlin at the time, West Berlin, which was controlled by Russia. So you have Ukraine, part of Russia, modern day time. You have all these other countries here, except for Belarus. You have Poland, Romania. It does not include Moldova. It's one of the few countries that is not part of NATO. But all these other countries are part of NATO. And I just want you to remember that Ukraine has been a long part of Russia. And to finish my example up about Gorbachev, this just perfectly illustrates how close they are. I think it was his mother was Ukrainian. His father was Russian, or switch it. It was one way or the other. People in Ukraine, I remember before the invasion, they were like, I just can't imagine Russia would invade us. So I just want you to know how near and dear this is to Putin's heart. Now, this is going to illustrate it, hopefully, much better. I'm going to pull us up a quick map of the United States because this is a way to compare apples to apples. In the mind of Putin, you got right here, let's just take Texas. I want you to pretend that Texas is Ukraine. It's really a very close example. I happened to grow up in Texas in middle school. And if y'all remember, wherever you go to middle school is where you get to learn about the state that you reside in, except you take a real deep dive. Well, don't get me wrong. I love Texas and I consider myself a Texan when you get right down to it. But Texas has flown under 5 different flags. It is a state with a very, very rich and complicated and ever-changing history. Again, I love Texas, so please do not misunderstand what I'm saying. So all my Texas friends out there, hello. You don't mess with Texas is what they say there in Texas. So imagine that, and this is obviously, this is absolutely true. You know, Texas is the only state in the union that in the state constitution, they negotiated with the federal government at the time that if Texas chose, I believe they have to have a 70% or more vote, Texas has the ability to leave the union. Because of the border situation that's been going on and the open border policies of Joe Biden, there have been a lot of people talking about what they call something like a Texit, you know, like a Brexit, except it's Texas leaving the union. Again, I don't want to get off on the subject as to whether or not the federal government would actually allow that to happen if Texas said they were leaving. My instinct tells me no way. There's no way they would allow that. Notwithstanding that, let's just continue with my example here. What do you think would happen if Texas did exit the union and for 30 years there was a separate country of Texas and there was the United States minus Texas, and all of a sudden out of the blue Russia decided they wanted to be BFFs with Texas? Not just BFFs, but a PAC member, basically an alliance, a military alliance with the state of Texas. You see where I'm going with this? Russia used to have something called the Warsaw Pact, and my understanding of that is it was basically the counter to NATO. It was a lot of the blocked countries. A lot of these countries are now part of NATO. Again, I don't want to make it too confusing. I just want you to imagine what the response would be from the United States if Texas was its own country and boom, they were going to go ahead, or there was talk of them joining, let's just call it the Warsaw Pact, which would be led, of course, by Russia, specifically Putin. That would be something that would rile us all up, wouldn't it? We would not be happy about that. We wouldn't want to have Russia on our back door. You may or may not remember from school, and I know Bernie Sanders has been talking about this on and off, and I can't believe I'm actually on the same page with Bernie Sanders about anything. However, there's this thing called spheres of influences that we just all kind of accepted as a way to keep the peace. And basically what that meant is that anything in South America, Mexico, or Canada was pretty well the domain of the United States, and anything that happened in Europe to one degree, at least let's just say Eastern Europe, essentially was going to be handled by Russia, or at the time the USSR. It was just the way things were kind of understood. It kept a peace. It kept things, it was a Cold War going on, but everything was kind of not moving. So I just think that this is probably a unique way to look at this. Russia has been very clear under Putin that this constant expansion of NATO is aggravating to them, and they will not tolerate it. Again, Putin says something, and he means what he says. Our leaders are not the same way, specifically Joe Biden. He's all over the place when he says something. Look what he did in Afghanistan with that disastrous withdrawal. He did not keep that base that the United States built, which of course we might need to use in the event of a problem with China. Not to mention, there is a resurgence of ISIS in the country of Afghanistan. Did y'all know that? They're actually worried about ISIS right now. All the nastiness that was going on, all that blood and treasure that was shed over there, it might be in vain, at least on some level, because of what I just said, because of Joe Biden and his policies. Folks, when you have weak and feckless leadership, this is the kind of nonsense and garbage that happens. And you put everything together, I understand why Putin went in. There's no way that if it was reversed, we would allow this to happen, to have Russia essentially take over what was part of the United States. So in their mind, in Putin's mind specifically, and it's more complicated than exactly what I'm saying, but it is a good illustration of what I'm saying, and that is that they look at Ukraine as their state, as their territory, and the thought of Ukraine becoming closer or becoming part of NATO is just something that he can't stomach. And I get that. I understand that. And again, I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying Putin should not have done this, but what I'm saying is we're getting ourselves in trouble. And as former President Donald Trump would say, sleepwalking into World War III. It's very troubling and very concerning. And as President Donald Trump has said before, you don't think Russia's going to lose, do you? I mean, on the battlefield right now, it's kind of a toss-up. In recent weeks, Russia has made some advances. Russia has all kinds of problems, but they have made some advances on the battlefield. The other day, Putin was again rattling about and I use the rattling with a question mark, but talking about nuclear weapons because they just suffered a huge blow to infrastructure, at least in this part of Russia, because there was a very large drone attack. So just kind of think about that. That is something that he's only going to take to a certain point. And if we just keep supplying tons and tons of weapons to Ukraine, well, I'm not sure what the end goal is. Russia's not going to back out of Crimea. They're not going to surrender this territory over here on the east side of Ukraine. And remember, Ukraine is huge. I believe Ukraine is bigger than Texas, as a matter of fact. And Texas is so big that if you flipped it on its side, one end would be in the Pacific Ocean and the other end would be in the Atlantic Ocean. When you look at a map of the United States, at least the continuous United States, or I should say the contiguous United States, it doesn't really put it to scale because Texas is so huge. I remember one time I was driving from Phoenix and I thought I was making really good time. And man, I was just driving and I was on it. I thought, man, I am making really good time. And the day's slipping by and I thought, oh, I got to be getting close. And I remember at the time I saw a sign that said Houston, 500 miles. I thought I was going to run off the road. I wasn't sure. It's a big, big state. Again, Ukraine is huge. I'm not sure where this ends, but there is going to have to be an end. There always is an end, and hopefully it doesn't end with nuclear war. Now, Putin discussing this is extremely problematic, unprofessional, and the fact that our leaders seem like they just categorize this as saber rattling is concerning to me. One thing I will also mention is that if he was to use some type of strategic nuclear weapon or just some kind of local weapon, as we were discussing, depending on the weather, depending on the time of year, most of the fallout would fall back on Russia because the weather patterns there kind of circulate in that particular manner. It's just the way the patterns flow. So there's a lot here to digest and a lot to talk about, but this NATO expansion has been really a thorn in his side, and I kind of understand it. I get it. I understand why Russia does what Russia does. One thing that come to my mind was I hear a lot of the news heads talk about, well, these Ukrainian people, they have a right to this, they have a right to, that sounds good. I hear it. And yeah, I'd like to see people live free, but that's not the reality of the situation, especially with the country that is scared of having the United States effectively right up against them. It would be concerning to me if the shoe was on the other foot. Do you guys agree with that? Did I explain that? I hope I didn't beat that to death. I just wanted to make sure I made that particular point because I think it's worth talking about. I don't think a lot of people understand exactly what's transpiring right now and just how serious this is and what the danger looks like for this. So, all right, let's go ahead and jump over to Sweet Fani. We're going to talk about this great situation that happened today where these charges were dropped by the judge. I'm hoping by Friday we're going to actually get a ruling on having her removed. We'll see how this works out. So let's go ahead and let's drill on this. Let me pull this up. If y'all have any questions on that, drop it in the comments and I'll try to get to them today. But let's go ahead and let's take a peek at this video real quick and we'll see how this does. Here we go.
News right now at noon. The judge overseeing the Georgia 2020 election interference case has just dismissed some of the charges against former President Donald Trump. I'm Lana Harris.
And I'm Rick Fulbaum. Now, most of the charges remain, but this news comes less than 24 hours after Mr. Trump became the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president. Atlanta News First reporter Rebecca Schramm joins us live from the Fulton County Courthouse. Rebecca, you have the court order.
I do, Rick and Lana, and I've been pouring through it. It is important to note what you said, that most of the charges remain. But yeah, the judge in this case basically agreed with the attorneys for Trump and the other defendants that there's a fatal flaw in some of the other charges. In a court order, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee wrote that 6 of the many counts in the Georgia election interference case against former President Donald Trump and his co-defendants must be quashed. 3 of the charges being dismissed are against Trump himself. The charges in question involve alleged efforts by the defendants to solicit elected officials to violate their oaths of office, including 2 charges related to the post-2020 election phone call Trump made to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. In his order, McAfee writes that prosecutors erred in the wording of parts of the indictment, noting in part, as written, these 6 counts contain all of the essential elements of the crime, but fail to allege sufficient detail regarding the nature of their commission, i.e. the underlying felony solicited. And something else to keep in mind, the judge wrote that prosecutors can seek a new indictment on those charges he just dismissed. Now, all of this comes as we await the judge's decision.
Okay, so she is exactly correct. They can. So the good news is 6 charges were dropped against these particular defendants. 3 of these charges specifically related to former President Donald Trump. So that is one more step towards victory. See, a lot of times in these cases, you notice that it's not always just a win or a lose. What's happening here, as we all can see, is a chiseling away. It's kind of like winning by 1,000 cuts versus death by 1,000 cuts. This case is imploding. This Fani Willis drama, it's just something every single day. The other cases against former President Donald Trump are also in serious jeopardy, if for no other reason but because of the timeline that they're up against. If Donald Trump is elected president of the United States again, they are really in serious jeopardy because he can pretty well erase these cases, make them go away just by his own order. So we'll have to stay tuned on that. Now, quickly switching gears again, Sapphire Acres, I totally agree with your comment here that yeah, Nikki Haley said Putin said after Ukraine. Oh yeah, I think what he's going to go after next, if he goes after the Baltics, it's World War III, because the Baltics are now part of NATO, period. However, where he's likely to go after is a small country called Moldova. I think we took a quick peek at that on the map. It is adjacent to Ukraine, but there are many Russians that speak Russian, that are Russian, that live in the east part of Moldova. And a lot of times that's the pretext that these countries use. That's what Hitler did when World War II started. He would say, oh, these people are ethnic Germans, they speak Germany, and boom, he goes in to protect them. This is how all this stuff gets out of hand and blows up big time, which is extremely unfortunate. And Matt, I agree with you, my friend. $20 trillion economy. They should pay for this. I totally agree with you on that. We cannot just keep giving money away. But I will tell you the flip side of the point. We have to make sure that Putin does not expand anywhere where there is NATO territory. That is absolutely true. I think it's frankly too late to stop him from what he's already done, because I mean, how are you going to stop him? What should have happened is we should have from day one led with strength. We should never have left Afghanistan. We should have never done a whole list of things that this President Joe Biden, has done worldwide to weaken the United States and make us look feckless, make us look weak. It's really a shame, and I am certain history is not going to be very favorable when it comes to looking back at Joe Biden. But we'll see. We'll see exactly how it goes. All right, man. Yeah, like I said, I'm on the same page you guys are. Yeah, New York has a GBR. I don't know what New York has in there. And Gloria, just lots of holes. Yeah, I believe that decision is going to come Friday as far as whether or not she's going to be removed. My best guess, she has to be removed. Same thing with Nathan Wade. There's really no other way. That perfect phone call was one of the charges that was eliminated against Donald Trump because most of this relates to the fact that it's unclear. She did not, they laid out the elements of the crime, but they did not specify the crime. I like to compare it this way. When you're charged with the crime as a defendant, you have a right under the Constitution to know what you're charged with. How would you like to show up for court, have to prepare a defense to keep yourself out of a cage? Basically, you have to fight for your life, not being thrown away, but you don't know what you're accused of. You don't know what you're indicted for. That doesn't make any sense. And effectively, that's what this is all about. Think of it this way as murder. How would you like it if you were arrested for murder, but they didn't tell you who you murdered? We're just going to arrest you for murder and we're going to throw you in jail and go ahead and put on the defense. But you don't know who you're accused of murdering. You don't know when, where, how. It just really doesn't make any sense. And I have every intention of drilling down. As you know, I showed you briefly a copy of the judge's decision with his signature at the bottom of it, showing it was filed today in this particular court in Fulton County. But we're not going to have time to get to it tonight, but it is on my agenda along with several other legal documents that I think would be a joy to read through. So I definitely have that on the agenda for each and every one of us. So, folks, we are already at that hour deadline, and I have to cut it short because I only have so much time, but I do want you to know I'll pick up exactly where I left off, and we will continue further with it. So much to talk about, so many subjects and things going on right now. I appreciate you joining me for this. Basically, a recap of what's going on. I think these are the main points that you need to know today. Always my pleasure for you guys to take time out of your day and spend it with me. It does humble me, and I sincerely appreciate it. I always say, keep that mind free and never give up. And until next time, my friends, I am JR.